Hello, I'm Ben, and you're watching The PhD Parent. So kids who are picky eaters tend to eat less vegetables than non-picky eaters. While there do not seem to be any interventions specifically developed to increase the consumption of vegetables in picky eaters, several have been developed to get kids more generally to eat vegetables. One such intervention is repeated exposure, and I'll discuss that in a video in the link down below. And another involves providing kids with a variety of vegetables, and again is discussed in a different video down below. Now, for lack of a better description, these interventions are what you should do, or at least try to do, to improve picky eating. But there's also been research into what you may not want to do. This research is focused on pressure to eat. For example, when you tell your kid to finish your vegetables or whatever. So in the following, I'm going to review the research that tells us about the impact of pressure to eat on vegetable consumption. As you'll see, the results are somewhat mixed, but on balance suggests that pressuring a kid to eat is not a productive way to get them to eat more. So the term pressure to eat refers to parenting behaviours that involve the requirement or strong encouragement to eat specific foods or amounts of foods. A range of different parenting behaviours can be involved, such as a child having to eat everything on their plate, getting a child to eat even when they're not hungry, or encouragement to eat vegetables first. Now, it's possible that pressuring a kid to eat increases the amount of a specific food you want them to eat. But it's also possible that pressuring a kid to eat decreases the amount of a specific food you want them to eat. To work out which of these possibilities is correct, researchers have adopted a number of different research approaches. Two common ones have been to, first, investigate the association between pressuring kids to eat and consumption of vegetables and fruit, when these are assessed using questionnaires. And the second approach has been to investigate the association between pressuring kids to eat and consumption of vegetables and fruits, when these are assessed using recorded interactions between parent and child during mealtime. Using these two types of approach, if pressure to eat is not helpful, then you find that higher levels of pressure to eat are associated with lower levels of vegetable and fruit consumption. But if pressure to eat is helpful, then you'll find that higher levels of pressure to eat are associated with higher levels of vegetable and fruit consumption. Now, the problem with these two approaches is that whatever pattern of results you get, you can't claim that pressure to eat is playing a causal role, because all that's been shown is an association between pressure to eat and food consumption. And that brings us to the third research approach. And this has been to investigate whether manipulating the amount of pressure for kids to eat has an impact on consumption of vegetables and fruits. In these studies, if pressure to eat does have a causal impact on food consumption, then the manipulation of the amount of pressure on kids to eat will have a subsequent impact on food consumption. Specifically, if pressure to eat is unhelpful, then kids exposed to more parental pressure will eat less vegetables and fruits. But if pressure to eat is helpful, then kids exposed to more parental pressure will eat more vegetables and fruits. So in the following, I'll describe the findings from studies that have adopted these different types of research approaches. So first of all, investigating the association between pressure to eat and vegetable and fruit consumption using questionnaires. So several questionnaire-based studies in which parents have reported the degree to which they pressure their kids to eat and their kids' food intake have shown that greater parental pressure to eat vegetables and fruit is associated with lower levels of intake of these foods. However, the association tends to be small. So for stats people, the correlations hover around about 0.2. Now, while this pattern of results has been reported in quite a few studies, the effect is not consistent. For example, Boursier did not find any evidence of such an effect, and Matheson and Bant found the opposite pattern. That is, greater parental pressure to eat vegetables and fruit was associated with higher levels of intake in kids. Now, despite these latter findings, on balance, you would probably be leaning towards the conclusion that pressuring your kid to eat is not that helpful. However, there are a few problems with relying on questionnaires. For example, parents may not be aware that they engage in certain behaviours, or they may have difficulty accurately recalling how often they engage in certain behaviours, or they may be reluctant to report engaging in certain behaviours. So for example, behaviours which may be looked down upon. And that leads us to the next approach, which is investigating the association between pressure to eat and vegetable and fruit consumption using recorded interactions. So rather than relying upon questionnaires, other studies have involved analysing video recordings of interactions between a parent and a kid. The basic approach has involved the parent and kid eating a meal together, either in the lab or at home, with the recorded interaction between the pair later coded in terms of the behaviours displayed by the parent towards the kid. For example, pressure to eat behaviours. And also the researchers get a measure of the amount of food the kid eats. So for example, Jordan recruited about 200 mums and their kids who were about 6 years old. And they video recorded them while the child was invited to eat a vegetable, in this case green beans, during the lab session. The results showed that greater verbal pressure by mum to eat was associated with lower consumption of green beans. Similar results have been reported by Blissett. However, Edelson found the opposite pattern, and as did Lee. Although in the Lee study, pressure to eat was actually set by a questionnaire measure, and kids were left to eat on their own rather than have their parent with them. So again, the results of these studies are not consistent, but on balance, I think you would still be leaning towards concluding that pressure to eat is not that helpful. So now on to the impact of manipulating pressure to eat on vegetable consumption. So as mentioned, a general problem with the studies reviewed thus far is that they're looking at the association between pressure to eat and food intake. Thus, even if the results were consistent, you still couldn't conclude that pressure to eat causes lower consumption of vegetables and fruit. But you can come at this issue by manipulating the amount of pressure placed on kids to eat. So in an experimental study, Galloway had kids eat soup, and in one condition they were pressured to finish it. That is, they were repeatedly told, "Finish your soup, please." And in another condition, they were not pressured to finish it. The kids then completed an assessment session where they were again given soup and simply told that they could eat as much or as little as they wanted. The results showed that during the assessment session, kids in the pressure condition ate less soup than kids in the no pressure condition. Similar findings were obtained by Riegel, who had kids eat corn. In one condition, kids were pressured to eat, that is, you have to eat the food, and in another condition, they were not. You may eat the food. The results showed that kids in the pressure condition ate less corn than kids in the no pressure condition. So the results of these studies suggest that pressure to eat is unhelpful, and importantly suggest that pressure to eat is playing a causal role in reduced food consumption. So in summary, most of the findings reviewed suggest that pressure to eat is unhelpful, in that higher levels of pressure are associated with lower levels of vegetable consumption. But some studies have found that it is helpful, in that higher levels of pressure have sometimes been associated with higher levels of vegetable consumption. So I've been sitting on the fence a little bit. It's possible that the latter findings are anomalous, and pressure to eat is in fact unhelpful. But an alternative possibility is that pressure to eat is sometimes unhelpful, and other times it may actually be helpful. But the outcome may depend, at least at this stage, on some unknown factor or factors. So this situation where you have mixed results is an interesting position for research literature to be in. So if the observed findings are genuine, then the challenge becomes trying to work out under what conditions an effect goes one way or the other. But that's an issue for researchers in this area to sort through. For the moment, if I were pressured to make a call, I'd say that the results of the manipulation studies tip me in favor of concluding that it's probably safest not to pressure kids to eat if the aim is to get them to eat more vegetables. Wouldn't bet the house on it though. So that's it for the impact of pressure to eat on vegetable consumption. If there's anything I've gotten wrong, any important research that I've overlooked, or if you have any questions, then feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, happy parenting.